Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the latest episode of my tactical analysis series on the Talking Wolves YouTube channel. It's me, Gully, at Molyneux Musings on Twitter. And unless you've been living under a rock, you'll have heard that Wolves have sacked their first ever set-piece coach specialist, Jack Wilson, after a poor start to the season on a number of levels, obviously, but specifically around conceding goals from set pieces. I think obviously the run of form that we've been on has many layers to it, but one of the things that we've all been pretty disappointed about is our susceptibility to conceding chances from set pieces and how easy it seems to have been that teams have scored against us. Now, Wilson wasn't obviously in situ for very long, 7 games, and there hasn't been an official club statement on his departure yet, as far as I'm aware, but the intimation was that he has been, the blame has been laid at his door for some of the issues that we've had. Suggestion that he didn't integrate into the group, the coaching group well, and was actually not even positioned on the bench for the last couple of games of his tenure at the club. So I wanted to really just kind of delve into the detail on this and really understand, have we been as bad as it suggests? Can we put it down to planning or execution of the set piece? And I think that's a really important distinction to make. I think first of all, when it comes to set pieces, there's always this big debate about zonal marking, man marking, how you set up the mechanics of how you're going to combat the delivery into the box. And the bottom line is that the most important thing that you can do is get your team first contact on the ball. There's nothing more important than that when it comes to defending set pieces. You can set up in whatever way you want to, and there are pros and cons to both. I don't subscribe to the man marking belief in the sense that the only real true positive and strength it has over zonal marking is that if you do concede a goal, you can point at the guy who perhaps let their man go or didn't do enough to stop their man from scoring. That isn't really a healthy way to look at it. I think it's just a blame game. Ultimately, you want to prevent rather than cure, and it's usually a combination of things that managers tend to do to set up now. The other important thing around set pieces is obviously delivery. Delivery has to be right. If delivery isn't right, or delivery is unintentionally causing you issues and things like that, it's a bit of a fait accompli. And then I think in terms of planning for set pieces, which is obviously why you bring in a specialist, is to devise plans, analyse and execute accordingly based on opposition past events and things like that. It's a bit chicken and egg in the sense that you can only deal with what you've seen previously from teams from an attacking perspective. Obviously, then we'll move on to how we attack teams from set pieces later on in the film. But you obviously can only analyse what you've seen from teams previously. So very early on in this season, the first time you've come across some of the things that teams would have been working on over the summer. We played the best set piece team in the country, I would suggest, in Arsenal first up, just as an example. Do you know exactly how they're going to go about what they're going to do, other than the data that you've got from the previous season? Not really. So I think there's a lot of layers to consider, and ultimately teams can surprise you. But in terms of what's actually happened this season, and the other aspect to this is, well, do we have the tools available to us to really make us strong in defending set pieces? And I wanted to kind of have a look at some of the data around this to see how we measure up. Looking at individual players, aerial duels 1 per 90 and aerial duels 1 percentage as well. And I think it's fair to say that our centre backs as a collective are okay in this area. I've included Max Kilman's data from last season as a bit of a benchmark. Kilman was 10th in this metric over the course of the entirety of last season. So it goes to show that he was a really, really important player for us when it came to defending the box and being dominant in these aerial duels. He wasn't necessarily contesting loads, but he was winning 70% of them. And the other player that you'll notice who's actually top of this table is Yersa Mosquera. From a percentage one perspective, 72, who's already obviously with a smaller sample set of data ahead of Kilman on that in that regard. So you're already looking, I would suggest, at a slightly weaker team in terms of aerial strength compared to last season, which obviously can cause problems in terms of that initial just desire and ability to get your head on the ball. It's so important that you have that within your arsenal to actually combat some of the teams that we've played so far. As a squad, we're winning 49% of our aerial duels across the entire pitch. It's middle of the road in terms of the way the rest of the league pans out, but you can see straight away that you've got some pretty strong headers of the ball with the likes of Totti in the team. Doherty, Mario Lemina is particularly strong in that area. Jurgen Strand Larsen competes for a lot, but isn't necessarily winning more than 50%, which as a striker, I think Dominic Calvert-Lewin comes in top of the entire league at this point, and he's only winning 50% of his duels, but he's winning 5.3 per game in terms of number. So it just goes to show that obviously you're coming up against the strongest players when it comes to aerial duels if you're playing as a striker against centre halves and things like that. So yeah, just thought it was good kind of benchmark to set in terms of how we what we have available to us. The other player that's important in this is obviously the goalkeeper. And Jose Sarr last season was one of the strongest goalkeepers in terms of stopping crosses, coming out and claiming things in the entire league. This season so far, it's much of a muchness between Sarr and Johnston. Obviously, it appears to be the case that Johnston isn't facing as many crosses as Sarr has done so far this season. But really, maybe not too much to take from that. I think there does, when you look at some of the other data, appear to be a bit of a weakness that's been identified, though. In terms of the number of corners we're conceding, we're the third worst team in the league for number of total number. And then when you look at the amount that are being swung in towards the kind of danger area on top of the goalkeeper, I would suggest 5 of those 7.5 corners are going in. So it feels like teams are really trying to target and get on top of us in the 6-yard box. Only one out-swinging corner per 90 that we're having to deal with. Again, and then on the opposite side of things, in terms of how many set pieces we're managing to win, and it just goes to show. I think this comes down to territory and a bit of nous in the final third and all that sort of thing. We're 18th in that regard, so not great. We are dead last or dead first in terms of the amount of goals we've conceded from set pieces. So the worst team in the division, alongside Southampton, who also have 4. But you can see straight away as well 18 shot creating actions from dead balls against us this year. So definitely something that we need to consider and have a look at. I'm going to go through a few kind of examples from the games that we've seen so far. Appreciate, it's pretty sad of me to go away and watch all of the corners that we've had to contend with this season, but it was insightful. And as I mentioned, we came up against the best set piece team in the country first game. And for the most part, we dealt with what they were doing. But what I will say is, you can see, even from the off, not knowing how we tended to set up, apart from what we did last season, teams were looking to target the back post area, which is where we've had most of our trouble. Incidentally, this was the first corner that we conceded in the entire season. Everybody descended on the front post from Arsenal at this point. It was an in-swinging corner again, so perhaps something that they felt that they could take advantage of in that sense. But another scenario here where you've got an overload at the back post. What we do tend to do in terms of our setup is keep all of our best headers free to go and attack the ball, which obviously ties in with the idea that you want to get your head on the ball before you even worry about sticking to men and all that kind of stuff. And the lesser headers of the ball are tasked with being blockers and tracking runners and all that sort of stuff. So it's really important to note that if you're asking a man to track a runner who is more useful in being able to attack the ball and being free and getting their head on the ball, someone like Craig Dawson, for example, whilst he might be a strong man marker, if the ball goes nowhere near that player and they're dragged out, with a decoy run or whatever, or he's blocked off by another marker, he's then unable to impact the play in the way that you want him to. So yeah, really, really important thing to kind of understand, I think. Moving on to Chelsea, we obviously conceded in the first few minutes in this game from a corner. This one, I think, is less down to the planning and more down to the execution. We actually get first contact on this ball. Mateus Cunha flicks the ball on towards the back post. There is a slight, I think, miscommunication between the three guys I've highlighted here as to, who should be covering the area deepest. But things happen so quickly on a flick on. It's very, very difficult to reset your position. I think we've planned for the ball into the near post, which is what happened, and we've dealt with it to an extent. If you get a bigger header on the ball, nobody's batting an eyelid, and it's an unfortunate one in the sense that obviously it lands right on Jackson's head. He's not had to do a fat lot of movement to get away from it. And I understand that, people are saying, well, he's free at that post, you should be marking him, etc., etc. But there seems to be a slight confusion off the back of the flick on. Those players would have seen the trajectory of the ball, and if they thought they could go and win it, and maybe they thought the ball was coming slightly deeper than it actually did, then they're going to maybe make a move towards the ball. The fact that two of them did the same thing, I think it's João Gomez and maybe Mosquera in this situation, and nobody was really thinking in the back of their mind, maybe we just need to combat what Chelsea have at the back post, is probably the slight issue here. But I don't think you put this one down to the plan, just the execution, ultimately. The next game, not a similar situation, obviously, but I think really another thing to note is the execution of the delivery, and the most percentage cross you can play, I think, on a corner is just a loopy ball to the back post. You're missing out the large percentage of the players, obviously you can see here, that are set up to deal with the ball towards the near post, which is where we tend to weigh most of our numbers. And you, as an attacking player, you're watching the ball, you're coming onto it, you can see it from a distance, and you've got the time to position yourself and attack appropriately. As a defender, I think in terms of your body position, I think it's more difficult, obviously, to come onto it in the same way, because your body shape is such where you're keeping an eye out towards the ball, and then you're moving away from your natural position to go and try and head. I do think, especially when I've been perhaps settled for a corner, I tend to float towards a back post so I can see what's coming, judge it, give myself as much time as possible to judge it, and then come onto the play and attack the ball. Whereas players who are set deep in their box, haven't necessarily got the run on you, and you can do this. The bigger issue here was that Semedo and Ait-Nouri, and if you watch this back, you see them have some sort of dialogue about who's picking up Chris Wood, and what ends up happening is neither of them do. Totti, I've pointed out here, is obviously there to deal with anything that comes towards the back post deep, but he's not really in a position to attack this ball because it comes out so far. He's got to make up a good 6 yards, whereas Chris Wood was already on the move anticipating this cross, and Semedo and Ait-Nouri did nothing to block Chris Wood's movement, and that was the biggest problem, I think, on this situation. So again, planning, execution, more to do with the execution than the plan, I would suggest. So not laying this one at Jack Wilson's door, probably. Then we move on to Villa, and you're beginning to obviously see a theme here. You've got a 4v3 at the back post on this situation. You have a 3v2 here. John Duran actually manages to get a header on this one and probably could have done better on this second situation. But I think teams are starting to now develop the idea that Wolves don't necessarily cover the back post with as much strength in numbers as the front post. And then you're starting to build up a picture based on the information and the analysis that they're doing to see, okay, there's probably a weak spot to be exploited. And you move on to Liverpool. Ibrahim Konate obviously scored against us in this game. Very, very strong. One of the top 3, I think, from last season for aerial duels won. And he's the guy standing at the back post in space to try and attack the ball. I can't remember exactly how these corners went in terms of delivery, but we never obviously suffered directly from a corner when it came to conceding a goal. It was the second phase of a set piece that we actually conceded the goal from Konate on. But the other thing to consider here is that you can see that Hwang is actually trying to communicate with the bench on this one. He's replaced Strand Larsen in this game. So Strand Larsen, obviously one of our bigger, more physical players, would have been situated here to deal with Konate. But then you've made a change and you've got a weaker player aerially who, let's be honest, hasn't really got a prayer of winning a header against Konate, which is also why we weren't smashing the ball up to Hwang, for the last 20 minutes of the game, and people talked about moving the ball moving the ball slowly, etc. But obviously then delivery has to be right, and we don't actually end up suffering from the corners here. But you can see from the first half, towards the back post, Strand Larsen is situated there as well, to perhaps combat the run that Konate is going to make. And then we move on to Brentford, which is obviously the nadir of the set piece weaknesses that we've shown. Again, pretty obvious that they've tried to exploit the back post here. This was one of the earlier set pieces that we didn't necessarily suffer from in the game, but it's just big. Like I said, that picture's being built up to say Wolves are weak at the back post. They don't cover as much ground. You can deliver a nice loopy cross, which isn't a difficult ball to deliver for a Premier League footballer. Let's be honest, and you might get some joy here. The most disappointing thing about these situations, and there's two in particular that you need to, which obviously ended up being chances and then a goal, is that it didn't take much at all. All that happens is Christian Norgard, who, I mean, I'll go back to this image here, which kind of shows you Christian Norgard just situates himself very close to Strand Larsen. Now, he doesn't really do a fat lot in terms of his blocking movement. All it is standing in his vicinity to ensure that when the ball comes over, if he wants to go and attack it, he has to get round Norgard as opposed to have a free run to go and attack the ball that is aimed towards Ethan Pinnock. It happens from the Brentford's right-hand side, just before the goal, and Pinnock gets a free header. You can see Larsen kind of scrambling to go and get towards him, and then it happens for the goal from the left-hand side as well. Just the simplest way of exploiting that lack of coverage at the back post, and we were undone. And that was the fourth goal in the game. It's absolutely killed us. Now, obviously, I think it's come out that Jack Wilson wasn't necessarily on the bench for this game, but he would have probably been involved in the setup for how we're defending these set pieces pre-match. And you really can't legislate for that level of not anticipating a problem. We've been reactive as opposed to proactive, having seen what teams had started to do throughout the season in order to try and create chances against us. I'm sure there's data around, the percentage chance of scoring from the back post versus the front post, and difficulties in managing front post runs versus back post, all this kind of stuff that I'm probably not au fait with or privy to. But I just think, it doesn't take a genius to work out that teams are starting to build a picture of Wolves and how they can exploit us. So the fact that we never did anything to truly combat that problem is where you need to ask a lot of questions. I mean, if Wolves end up conceding from a set piece in our next fixture, we all know the kind of furore that's going to come off the back of it, because we've sat the set piece coach. We've gone back to probably the setup that we had last season, which had a lot of success. We didn't concede from a corner until February last season. Scott McTominay for Man United against us at home. But like I say, it's just going to be poetic if that ends up happening for whatever reason. And Man City are another team who are strong from set pieces. I did want to touch very briefly on attacking set pieces as well. We did score one from Jack Wilson's time at the club, and I guess the key point to take from this is it's a potential shooting situation. Who knows what would have happened prior to his arrival, but the idea was to deliver the ball instead. We've done this quite often where Aït-Nouri and Cunha will both stand over the ball to create a little bit of uncertainty around how the defensive line should drop, and what time and the timing around that. If it's an in-swinging cross or a shot at goal, obviously, then they'll act accordingly. But knowing that this is Aït-Nouri clipping the ball up towards Totti Gomez, who heads it across to Strand Larsen, I think we did well in terms of setting that goal up. What I will say is Chelsea are also one of the weakest teams at defending set pieces in this league. So perhaps we should be exploiting them anyway. Another couple of chances that we had early in the game against Chelsea, Yerson Mosquera clipping the post with a header. There was nothing particularly innovative about what we were doing. Cunha being a corner taker for us is new as well. But what I've seen from him and the way he's taking corners is he's very much just aiming for an area, we set our best headers of the ball somewhere near the penalty spot or deeper, and we're making sure we try and get a run on them. Mosquera probably should have scored in this situation. Mario Lemina tends to sit within the 6-yard box as someone who is physically strong. If you remember the goal that he scored against Chelsea last season, it wasn't by getting a run on a man, it was being stout, strong, and getting a flick on a header to score. He almost does this again against Villa. On Amadou Onana was on him, and it was obviously imperious in the air, but he showed his ability to withstand contact and be physical in that space. Was perhaps quite unlucky because I think this deflected into Martinez's hands. But I think the overarching feeling was that if you're going to bring in a set piece coach, you're going to see innovation, you're going to see different things happening, short corners, short set pieces, different movements, different runs, blocking, all that sort of stuff. And it didn't seem to be the case that we actually implemented anything like that. You compare us to someone like Austin McPhee at Aston Villa, and you know that they've clearly got very well communicated plans that they all look to the bench to as and when they're setting up for a set piece to say, look, we'll try this one, we'll go for that one, and the players understand exactly how they're meant to execute that. I think that's probably where Jack Wilson may have fallen short in terms of his delivery of what his ideas were. I know he worked as an analyst previously. Working as an analyst versus a coach obviously brings its different challenges. And showing information like I do. I mean, I can highlight things in videos to people till the day I die. But in terms of coming up with solutions to combat things, that's a different kettle of fish. That's where coaching is the skill that it is, and you need to bring a little bit more nous and a little bit more intelligence probably to that party. Like I say, it'll be poetic if we end up conceding a goal from a set piece against Man City next weekend, but also poetic if we end up scoring one. Was Jack Wilson the problem? Certainly not the biggest one, I would suggest, but someone who was responsible for something that was compounding some of the other issues that we have within the squad. So let's see how we move forward without him, and hopefully things can start to turn around a little bit with a bit of a free hit against Man City, shall we say.